Your Own Labor. I am your host, Christy Callising, and on set with me, I've got members from BIGWU. We have Mr. Trevor Johnson, the General Secretary, and we've got Mr. Alva Allen. Good morning to you, gentlemen. How are you this morning? It's been a rainy morning. How's the weather been?
Well, challenges, but as you know, trade unionists, weather doesn't keep us back. We had quite a rainy day in Faizabad for Labor Day, and we still made it through and completed our event successfully in Faizabad. So, rain or sunshine, we are up and about.
What's the familiar saying? The only thing rain stops is cricket?
Cricket.
Oh my gosh. So tell me, how was Labor Day celebrations? Showers of
BIGWU,
blessings.
Yeah. BIGWU was part of the JTUM celebration in Faizabad. We started off typically with the laying of the wreath ceremony at the gravesite of former Chief Servant Tubal Uriah Buzz Butler, and then at the headstone of Labre Charles. Always a bit of an interesting history there, because Labre Charles was killed in the 1937 riots because he was actually mistaken for Butler. So every year at the start of Labor Day, we do that commemoration. But Labor Day this year, under the Joint Trade Union Movement, was very successful, because in many quarters there were those who might have felt that, given some of the challenges Labor faced in 2018, that they were not really expecting such a big turnout. But I think Labor surprised everyone. We had a very impactful turnout, lots of numbers on the street, and all of the leaders from the various units of the Joint Trade Union Movement were out. All of the leaders were able to bring their messages and greetings. And then, of course, we had the keynote address by the president of JTUM and also President General of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, Comrade Ansel Roger. And as I said, we had a very impactful...
I would have seen an article where he said the trade union movement is alive and well.
Alive.
Because, I mean, there's been a lot of talks that the trade union movement is slowly dying, or it's not relevant, but it's really, to me, it's really nice to see that people braved the rains. They came out in their numbers. They supported. They actually came out, and it's something that you don't really see on a regular. So it must tell you to an extent how important this must be to them. I mean, on a regular, if it's raining, you're not gonna get somebody going outside unless it's really important. So to me, that was very commendable.
And one significant thing I'd like to mention as well is that there were quite a lot of young people, young working people, because again, there's an assumption that Labor, well, some of the older heads will always support. But it means that there are issues out there in the workplace and in the world of
work. It's
nice
to see young people impacting,
and young people are coming out, because they are being impacted. We have contract work, as a scourge in the, that is affecting young people coming into the workplace and being, a whole number of challenges, apart from contract labor.
But the issue of contract labor, it is something that it's slowly creeping up on the workforce. We've been seeing a switch from, well, not a switch, but a shift away from contract labor, from permanent labor to contract labor. And most workers, I think, they aren't fully aware of some of the benefits that are being taken away from them due to this switch.
Just before you go into contract labor, we come on it a bit. I just want to add one point on the question of Labor Day. I felt was very significant. In my own view, I think it was an act of defiance by the workers against all the odds. The employers thought that they might have beaten us staff razzle, but I think the workers have defied those odds. And it really tells what is going to happen in the coming period. That the workers are going to stand up and fight. Come what may, they will stand up and fight. That's what this Labor Day was all about.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that is what is needed actually, because many workers suffer in silence. Huh? When you look at it, in many sectors of society, you have workers. They will discuss it among themselves, but when it actually comes to doing something, a lot of times workers tend to shy away, and I think to some extent they don't feel protected, but that's what the trade unions are here for. So, to always reassure workers that they got your back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If I could just ask you all, there was a bill that was recently introduced and subsequently passed, which will see the increase for pensions for members of parliament, members of the magistracy, judges, most of the higher ups. So you have that being introduced and passed, and then on the one hand you have that, and on the other hand you have a case where members from the public service, public sector workers that is, they've been clamoring for pension for years. But you have something introduced overnight and being approved, but yet you still have thousands of workers waiting on their pension, what is rightfully theirs. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it speaks to the propagation of one of the some people say injustice, the whole issue of inequities being propagated in the system, because here you have again those at the top, at the very top, as you said, who already have fairly generous and or decent retirement benefits. I mean, I think it's a well-known fact, for example, that the office of the president and that of the prime minister of the country, basically their pension is equal to their current salary for life.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter, as far as I know, subject to any input by Alva, how long they serve. So there's a major concern about that, not just among trade unions. Let me make it clear. The average worker and average John public out there is very concerned that the government can rush a piece of legislation, kind of sneak it into Parliament, whilst people are dealing with other things, and seek to get past and enhance pension benefits and retirement benefits, whilst there are workers out there who, just to name a few, the National Union of Government and Federated Workers, I think over 30 years for daily paid and daily rated workers, they do not have any pension plan. And there are a whole host of other agencies, a lot of workers in the private sector. You hear talk of people saying, well, why don't you just take out an annuity and but an annuity is not akin to, yes, of course it can assist, but what people are looking for is some determined pension.
Something sound.
Yeah. I mean, we know our union has dealt with a case in Tobago, for example, where someone worked with a major hotel for 27 years. I mean, their working life, and at the end of their retirement, you know what happened? The manager shook their hand and said thank you.
So nothing.
And that person went off. There was no gratuity, no pension arrangements, and essentially what this person has to now depend on is just simply the national insurance benefit. But you work with an organization, and I raise this point not as an isolated issue, but because this repeats itself over and over on a daily basis, where workers in the private sector and in the public and state sectors work a whole number of years, their entire working life, and many times after they are walking away without any certified pension arrangements for them to live the rest of their lives
you basically
in a dignified manner.
Don't reap the benefits you've worked all your life for. So it's there. It's not given to the workers rightfully. Mr. Allen, your thoughts on it?
Quite a few. First of all, it seems that we have started a new trend in our politics every time a government is on the verge of coming out of office, they rush the parliament to the bill to fix themselves. The last government did basically the same thing. Most of the pension issues that have been raised now were in fact raised by the last government, and the then opposition was in agreement with the changes to improve pensions for themselves and those high holders of office in the country. Right? This government is on the verge of coming out of office, and they're going to do the same thing again. But the trend appears that they fix themselves first, and everybody else later with them. Look at what has now happened with the government daily paid workers that Trevor was talking about earlier. For more than 30 years, they have been arguing for a pension plan. At one stage, the chief personnel officer agreed, then it never implemented, and so on, and they end up without a pension. So that's one scenario. And another scenario that we have to consider is the fact that while they have increased their benefits, look at what is going to happen to all those who now have to depend on NIS pensions. The 10th actuarial report of the NIS, which is online on the NIB's website, the actuary had made a recommendation to reduce NIS pensions by 6% for each year that you retire prior to age 65.
Yeah.
So if your retirement age is 60 and you retire at that age, you will end up losing 30% of your minimum pension. So you will end up with a pension about $2,100 a month. I mean, what's the point in that? Right?
Yeah.
And that actuarial report was approved by NIB. It was sent to the government. They now understand that they have tabled it in Parliament somewhere around March or thereabouts. So that is being proposed at some point to become law. And that is most unfair, grossly unfair for people to end up losing part of what they are legally entitled to,
Yeah.
while others just fix themselves.
And then I know there were talks of, I would have seen Senator Alison West talking about the retirement age itself. And she was talking about moving it up to 65. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, the Joint Trade Union movement would have actually appeared before a Joint Select Committee of Parliament in 2018, if I recall correctly, where we put our position on that. And I think the National Trade Union Center would have had representatives at that particular session as well in Parliament, where we basically indicated to them that the retirement age at 60, we accept that there may be areas within where unions may have or otherwise negotiated where to a few areas where they may go to 65, but typically in most collective agreements in
60.
Trinidad and in most areas where we operate, the retirement age is 60. And there are a whole number of reasons that you have to look at for that. One, when you raise the retirement age to 65 or 67, and some experts suggest it may very well in some areas reach to as high up as 70, which is primarily based on an actuarial calculation that says this is what we can afford. And one of we could call it a layman's argument is, okay, so if it is that financially or actuarially we cannot afford pensions, to people who are 65. Are you then going to say we raise it to 67 or 70? So retirement age cannot be premised only on actuarial calculation.
Okay.
There are a number of social and other issues. People want to retire at a certain age to be able, having worked
personally, I think
having worked
60
for
is
40
a lot.
years, you want to be able to, move the whole process of self-actualization, do something different with your life. You have grandkids, you have other things you would like to do. When you move the retirement age up to 67, 70, whatever it is, you are basically telling someone they are moving from the workplace, or to the graveside, because there will then be that very little space.
You won't be able to enjoy your retirement.
Your retirement,
in such a short
your retirement age. So whilst there are arguments, yes, that mortality rates have people are living longer, etc. as a result. But there are still people who unfortunately passed away, shortly after retirement. I mean,
Or some
the
pass
records
away while waiting.
whilst waiting. So that, and there are people who have passed away waiting on their pensions, by the way, because even when there is a pension plan in place, sometimes the whole bureaucracy of it, the system is replete with people who have reported waiting 3, 4, 5, 6 years before they get there after retirement. So very often people may unfortunately pass away. You also have we have to consider as a nation the high numbers of unemployed youth.
Yes.
And if you keep pushing the retirement age up, and whilst you want to keep maybe the mature people with experience employed, but we have a bottleneck of young people leaving secondary schools, leaving universities, leaving whatever form of education level, educational institutions, and not being able to find secure employment.
Yeah.
And therefore, the government has a social responsibility to look at that balance of pushing the retirement age up, and therefore people not leaving the workplace, and therefore you have a bottleneck of young people, and that's a social explosion, potential social explosion you're looking at. So as a society, we have to look at the balance. We have to get young people into the workplace. We are not saying that people past 60 shouldn't work, by the way, but we are saying that you could have a number of creative ways that you can keep them engaged. But really, in this, we need to have a stream of people coming into the workplace as well, so that there's a balance that needs to be looked at. And the position of the joint trade union movement is that our position is that the official retirement age should be 60. There could be a number of unofficial arrangements for when you get past 60.
Yeah.
Not a problem with that. We have no objection to that. Yeah.
Ms. Allen?
Well, I just want to put it mildly. In my own view, the proposal to increase the retirement age to 65 is nothing short of robbery with people. That's how I describe it mildly. Because the workers will be, in fact, denied of their pension rights at age 60. You are robbing them of that.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't cost you anything more to continue employing them up to age 65, but you are robbing them of what they're entitled to. In fact, the arrangements that we have in the country right now, if somebody is due to retire at age 60, they retire, they get a pension. You want to take them back on, you take them back on contract, you pay them contract salary, but they get their pension. That is happening throughout the length and breadth of the country. So when you tell somebody that their retirement age is going to change to age 65, you're denying them their pension right as at age 60 that they are lawfully entitled to. And that has to stop, because what is happening again and again, every time we face a crisis, the workers have to pay the price for it.
Yeah, and a good example is yesterday there was I don't know if you all know, but there was a mass protest outside. Yes, by tutor.
I saw it.
I mean, there were hundreds of teachers showed up, very disgruntled. They were picketing for rightfully theirs again, negotiations, salaries, a salary increase. Some of those teachers are surviving on a 2013 salary. Again, PSA and CPU. PSA has been fighting for negotiations with probably there's a glimmer of hope on the horizon, who knows. But I mean, in terms of, like you rightfully said, to get what is yours, you aren't really getting that.
Yeah. And there's a challenge when, just because the last time we were on this program, we mentioned that most of the public servants, teachers, etc., and in the state sector are 2 negotiating periods behind. So we are in 2019, and people are working on 2013 salaries. And those are the ones that are lucky. We have people, again, I repeated, like at Cipriani College, electors 2007.
2007.
Since 2007.
Wow.
The support staff at Cipriani on 2011 salaries. We have workers at Cardi, 2004 salaries. And if you do the research there, in between there are others. So, but the point is, as we talk in retirement, So the person who is on a 2007 salary, because your pension is basically calculated on your last salary.
Yeah.
But if your salary is 2 or 3 negotiating periods behind, they're going to also calculate your pension on that.
Okay.
So that you can, so a 60-year-old somebody retiring at 60, but they are 2 negotiating periods behind. They get a pension calculated on really what is not their, not what should be their proper salary. So the negotiations are settled 6 or 7 years later. So they now have to do an adjustment, but by which time that person could have died. Maybe the estate might get it, I don't know. But the point I'm making, there's a connection or a nexus between delayed negotiations and even how pensions are calculated. Alba might be able to comment on that better. But there's that all of those are concerns when you have that many things that are connected to the disadvantage of workers in terms of delayed negotiations or delayed settlement of negotiations. The average worker in the public service now is on a 2013 or 2014 salary, but the price of fuel has gone up 5 times since that, with the minister gleefully saying, well, nobody has protested, so we're okay. But I hope you're seeing what is happening in Hong Kong, in France, and Sudan, and many parts. People are, not trade unions, people in their mass numbers around the world are going out of this on the street saying enough is enough. And this government needs to take note of that we are not insulated from that kind of groundswell of people just waking up one morning and saying, look, we have had enough of this, we have had enough of parliamentarians raising their own pensions, and not just raising their pensions and their basic salaries, by the way. Our understanding is that as we're talking about pension in the parliament, there was a proposal, I don't know if it passed, that they would add some of their other allowances onto that. Now that does not happen for the average worker. So again, you're telling me that the person at the top who is in a position to be able to afford certain things, but yet you're going to add on when you're telling the average worker, as Alva said, that you're going to cut 6% from their pensions based on an actuarial report. So where's the equity?
There's no balance.
Where's the justice, social justice in that?
But Trevor, you're making a point about the allowances.
Yeah.
We can't do that with our pensions, because the regulations from the Board of Inland Revenue, it prohibits that from being done. They can do that for themselves, but the workers can't benefit from that, because those are the draft regulations that are being implemented by the Board of Inland Revenue, and all pension plans have to conform with that. They can use full salary as a pension. We can't do that, again, because the BIR draft regulation says that pensions can't cross 2/3 of final salary. So that is the inequity in it. They can benefit, but we can't. And that is unfair, it's wrong.
So how do we fix that?
Well,
we have to go back to the drafting board with everything again, or could we make amendments to something? How do we fix it so that what is good for the upper heads should be good for the working class as well?
Well, TJ might remember we appeared before a Joint Select Committee of Parliament
in 2014
and made recommendations to address those issues, right? And those recommendations fell on deaf ears. It seems that the trade union movement might have to begin flexing in order to fix that. Because it's not to say that we didn't make recommendations.
Right.
We made recommendations.
And what were some of the recommendations?
One, remove the cap on pensions.
Right, yes.
That was the first recommendation. Right? Remove these restrictions to add or not consolidate cost of living allowance and other regular allowances onto your rate in order to make it a pensionable salary. Those are some of the things that we did talk about.
And we had also spoken then about the process of the impact of harmonization, which is, because that is another burning issue, because there are several organizations in Trinidad and Tobago who, once a retired worker begins to be in receipt of a national insurance pension, they make a deduction from your work-related pension, and therefore, instead of benefiting from a full national insurance pension and a full work-related pension, there's a synchronization of it so that you in effect get a reduction. And when we appeared before the Joint Select Committee of Parliament, we did make a recommendation on that, because most of these private pension plans, in the private sector, are cash rich.
Yes.
In one of them in particular, in the banking sector, they have been on I think it's now reaching a 30-year contribution holiday, meaning where the employer has not had to put any money. The pension plan is basically funding itself because it is cash rich, so that why are you therefore denying workers or making them subject to this harmonization process, which is simply to deny the worker their rightful means? And when we went to the Joint Select Committee, then several parliamentarians admitted they weren't even aware of how this harmonization thing was in effect, but yet they run to Parliament for themselves, both the government and opposition. And Alva was mentioning, it seems to me that the only time the government and the opposition in this country agree in Parliament is when there are benefits to themselves. So on the last occasion, the other side was in the opposition, and I remember the newspaper headlines where they very gleefully agreed with the government then. It was then the other side in part. So they get together and they agree. So like they agree to put their differences aside so that we can fill our pockets. And then after that we can go back and pretend that we are on disagreement on other issues. So labor legislation, I haven't heard any signal. Because by the way, we have appeared in over 20 sessions of consultation where on labor legislation with this particular government. And up to now, from 2015 to we are in 2019, and not a single piece of labor legislation has come before Parliament. But yet the same government finds time to...
consultations? You know, what is the point of the consultations then if it's nothing is being adhered to, they're not, you know...
Well, that's the point I was making. And again, I mean, there's a level of hypocrisy because on Labor Day, you would hear the Minister of Labor and you hear the Prime Minister talking about
working
labor.
Together.
We go, the National NTAC,
National Tripartite
Committee,
Advisory
Council, you would hear them saying, okay, let's get together, let's talk, let's, etc., etc. But 2015 to 2019, not whether it be on pensions for workers, whether it be on the Retrenchment and Severance Benefits Act, minimum wages, not a single piece of labor legislation. And the government is still indicating, yes, we are coming to Parliament soon. Coming, you know, it's like coming soon.
But again, it doesn't benefit them, so they don't see the urgency to bring that to Parliament.
But how soon is soon? This government, all government have a 5-year term of office which expires. So when are you going to bring labor legislation to Parliament?
You never know,
for
it can be rushed.
It can be
rushed. I don't think so, though.
No.
I really don't think that's...
Labor legislation is never rushed because you have the business elite interest.
You need to have consultations.
Who will make sure that you have consultation.
Yes.
But where was the consultation with this pension bill that came before Parliament? Can you recall? Which communities did they go in and say, we are going to bring this legislation before Parliament? We'd like to hear your views on it.
This bill was like a thief in the night.
So that's the point. So if the government wants to bring legislation to Parliament, it has shown that it can. When it comes to the labor movement, it tells you, boy, we have to go to the, some drafting committee, we have to have consultation, we have to have some policy framework, etc., etc. And it tells you minimum these things takes 18 months. But we are double 18 months. We are now into almost 48 months of the government and not a single piece of labor legislation. But you pass pension legislation in a matter of weeks. And so we are always saying, and we are warning, if this government and if the society does not take stock, it would not be the labor movement rising up and going on the street, and it will be look at what is happening around the world.
It's just everybody.
Right.
one of the most hurtful things about labor legislation that I want to come in on involves these steel workers when all of them were sent packing some years ago. And all that it required for them to get their severance pay was just one amendment to the Retrenchment and Severance Benefits Act to make that situation fall in line with the definition of retrenchment and redundancy. Years have passed. The workers haven't gotten 1 cent because of the loophole in law, the deficiency in the act, and they continue to suffer. Some have even committed suicide. And all it took was just one amendment.
And welcome back to PSA TV. This is Eye on Labor. We're just stepping a bit over time. On set, I've got with me the General Secretary of BIGWU, Mr. Trevor Johnson, and I've also got the Education and Research Coordinator of BIGWU, Mr. Alva Allen. And before we went to news, we were talking about labor legislation, something that is very critical, yet we have not seen it happening at all. Gentlemen, I just want to touch a little bit on labor reform before we wrap things up. Your thoughts on how important it is in society?
Well, as you mentioned, both labor legislation and labor reform, the two go, to me,
hand in hand?
Yeah, the two go hand in hand. So labor legislation is critical because most of the pieces of labor legislation we operate by now in the main are 50 years plus old. And so when you have people, governments, and when it suits the certain people in the columnists, etc., and they talk about trade unions needed to come up to trade unions and trade unionists needed to come up to date. But one of the things you need to consider is the legislation that we operate under. Very archaic, very outdated, and I would accept that labor reform, of course, unions have their own role to play in that. And sometimes there's sometimes a lot of unsung things that are being done in the labor movement that are deliberately not recognized in terms of what trade unions are doing in terms of education.
And you were telling me about the education.
Programs, in terms of use of, in terms of communications, use of technology, etc. The world of work, dealing with the world of work. 2019, the ILO, in 2019, the ILO is celebrating, is the ILO centenary, International Labour Organization, and their focus this year is on the future of work and the world of work. And
interesting.
Since 2012, 2014, several trade unions, and admittedly not all, have been very focused on what the future world of work would look like and how we as trade unions will be able to prepare workers and to be able to respond to that. Up to now, for example, as we talk about the government and what it's doing, you're really not hearing anything, any focused attention. I don't know whether it's the Ministry of Labor or what part of government is actually preparing for the future world of work. Which, when we talk about the future of work, by the way, it's with us now. We say the future world of work, but the future is, in terms of the changes in the world of work, is now. Now, automation, artificial intelligence, all of these things are issues that in the labor movement is looking at. And we are not hearing much on that from government. So that is something. And in terms of labor reform, how we prepare ourselves for that, I would say the labor movement is ready to deal with all of these things, but it is a tripartite process a lot in the main, and it needs buy-in from the government and the tripartite agencies that we have to deal with. Yeah.
Mr. Allen?
Well, I agree with what Trevor said. One of the new features about this new world of work is the type of work relationship with employers. take for example Uber drivers.
Yeah.
There are about 8 million of them around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And their employment contract says that they are not workers.
Yeah.
They are independent contractors. So that is what the future looks like, transforming workers into independent contractors. But I think the example that these Uber drivers set recently, they took strike action, I think it was somewhere about May.
Yeah, there were a lot of protests around the
Yes,
world.
yes, and they were demanding the change from that term of independent contractors to workers.
I think shortly after they had recorded a profit, I believe it was, the workers who just, like, they started to protest.
Yes, that was when they was about to launch the IPO.
Yes.
Right? So while the employers are trying to transform workers into independent contractors, and you have this phenomenon of contract work and so on, the workers themselves are resisting against that and demanding the changes. So the future in terms of what work would look like is very interesting. I think that we're going to see a lot more interaction between the employers and labor going forward. But it is for the workers now to determine what is the kind of future that they want.
Yes.
Is this what the employers presented? Is this the future that we want? Or are we going to demand a different type of future that will serve to benefit all of us and give us a decent standard of living?
Gentlemen, if I could just ask you your closing comments, because we've stepped over time.
Yes, certainly.
So, your closing comments.
Well, for me, I just want to end where we started a bit. Labor legislation, I think it's obviously critical, not just for the labor movement, not just for workers, but for the country at large. We need to begin to deal with that because it covers the ambit of everything we have dealt with, including pension reform, which needs to happen, including contract work, which is being proliferated, all over the country, and therefore, BIGWU, that would be one of the things, and is one of the things that we are a strong advocate and will continue to be, and as part of one of the units of the Joint Trade Union movement, our push is to see immediate, and I mean immediate, in an immediate response and implementation in terms of moving things forward with all the labor consultations we have done. It is time to move to the next step. We have had enough talk, and it's now time for action.
Mr. Allen?
Teacher spoke for both of us.
All right.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right. Well,
So,
it's
thank you.
on that note we have come to the end of today's show. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all so much for coming on today. So that's it from us for today's show. I am Christy Singh. On behalf of all of us here at PSA TV, here's wishing you a safe and blessed day.